There is a quiet myth that lives in our collective imagination, the idea that time will heal, that forgetting is the path to freedom. Move on, people say, as if you can simply pack your memories into a box, tape it shut, and send it down the river of oblivion. But the truth is, you don't move on by forgetting. You move on by remembering differently. Because forgetting is an erasure, a void. It demands that you amputate the very parts of yourself that once loved, that once believed, that once hoped. And if you cut off every memory that ever hurt, you also cut off the roots that gave you meaning. So when people tell you to forget, what they really mean is, stop hurting. But healing is not the absence of pain, it's the transformation of it. Let me tell you a story. A woman once came to see me after the end of a long marriage. "It's been a year," she said, "and I still can't stop thinking about him. I thought I'd be over it by now." And I asked her, "What do you mean by over it?" She paused. "You know, that I wouldn't think about him, that I'd feel nothing. But feeling nothing is not healing, it's numbing. It's like freezing a wound so you don't feel the cut. Healing, on the other hand, is when you can look at the scar and no longer flinch. When the memory stops bleeding and starts telling a story, not of loss, but of evolution. Because every relationship leaves a fingerprint on who we become. We don't simply walk away unchanged. We carry traces, a way of laughing that once belonged to someone else, a song that still stirs something deep, a habit of reaching for the light switch on the left instead of the right. Love imprints us, and grief is the echo of that imprint trying to find a new home inside us. When you forget, you exile those traces. But when you remember differently, you begin to integrate them. You let them become part of your story, not as an open wound, but as a healed scar. Tender, yes, but no longer defining. So perhaps the question is not, how do I forget? But how can I remember in a way that frees me? Memory is not static. It's a living thing. It shifts, it breathes, it transforms with time. The same memory can imprison you or liberate you, depending on the meaning you give it. Take, for instance, a man who grew up with a father who never said, "I'm proud of you." For years, he remembers that silence as rejection, as proof of his inadequacy. But later, he begins to see that his father's silence was not absence of love. It was the only language he knew. And suddenly, that same memory, unchanged in fact, feels different. The pain softens, not because it vanished, but because it was reinterpreted. That is what it means to remember differently. We often think of memory as a recording, something we play back, identical each time. But memory is more like a painting we keep adding layers to. We brush on new colors as we grow, as we understand, as we forgive. So maybe moving on isn't about closing the book. It's about writing a new chapter that gives the previous ones context. When people say, "let go," they imagine dropping something heavy. But sometimes letting go means holding it differently. Not with clenched fists, but with open palms. Letting go is not forgetting. It's acceptance. Acceptance that the story didn't end the way you wanted, that some words were never said, that some dreams will remain suspended in the air like unfinished sentences. But acceptance also means you stop waiting for a different ending. You stop rewriting the past and start living with it. You start asking, what has this taught me about myself? How has this pain shaped the person I am now becoming? And in that question lies the seed of transformation. Because we don't grow from what we lose, we grow from how we interpret the loss. I often say, pain demands a narrative. When something shatters inside us, the first instinct is to make sense of it, to build a story around it, because meaning is the bridge between suffering and growth. So ask yourself, what story do you tell about what happened? Are you the abandoned one, the betrayed one, the one who failed? Or are you the one who dared to love, who risked vulnerability, who learned how deeply they could feel? The story you choose determines the memory you live with. You see, remembering differently is an act of authorship. You reclaim the power to define your experience. You stop being the character in someone else's story, and you begin to narrate your own. And sometimes remembering differently means allowing contradiction. You can miss someone and know they weren't right for you. You can cherish what was and still acknowledge the pain it caused. You can grieve what you lost and be grateful that it happened. Love doesn't need to disappear for you to move forward. It only needs to change its form. The love you once directed outward can turn inward, into wisdom, into compassion, into strength. Because memory is not about holding on to a person. It's about holding on to the part of yourself that was awakened by them. So when people ask, "How do I move on?" I tell them, you move on when you can remember without reliving, when you can tell the story without drowning in it, when the memory no longer defines your pain but deepens your humanity. It's not forgetting that heals you. It's remembering, but differently. And this kind of remembering is an act of love. Love not for the person you lost, but for the person you are becoming because of it. Because ultimately, healing is not a destination. It's a way of living with what you've lived through. Let's go deeper. Memory is not just a collection of images. It's a landscape. Every corner, every scent, every word echoes a feeling that once made us come alive. To remember differently is to walk through that landscape and change the lighting. To see it not only in the darkness of what hurt, but in the glow of what mattered. Have you ever returned to a place years after you left it? An old house, a childhood street, a cafe you once loved, and felt how the place was both familiar and foreign. The chairs are the same, the trees still sway the same way, but you are different. The person who stands there now is not the one who once belonged there. That is the essence of remembering differently. The memory remains, but you have changed, and so has its meaning. When we forget, we freeze time. But when we remember differently, we allow time to thaw what was once frozen. Because memory, at its core, is relational. We remember through the lens of who we are today. The same event can look cruel or kind depending on where we stand now. And so, when we heal, we don't erase the past. We reinterpret it. Memory is like a mirror that doesn't reflect reality, but emotion. We don't remember the past as it was. We remember it as we felt it. Every recollection is tinted by the emotional lens of that moment. The ache of longing, the thrill of closeness, the sting of disappointment. But here's what's beautiful. As you grow, as you evolve, your lens changes, and so the same memory can begin to tell you a new truth. You see, remembering differently isn't an act of rewriting history. It's an act of reclaiming authorship. It's the moment you realize you can hold your memories without them holding you hostage. I think of memory as a house with many rooms. In one room there is joy, in another regret, in another tenderness that still trembles when touched. Most of us lock the doors we can't bear to open. We leave those rooms untouched, filled with ghosts. But healing asks you to walk back into those rooms, not to live there again, but to air them out, to let the light in. When you dare to open those doors, you may find that the things you feared most have softened. The monster under the bed is just a shadow cast by old pain. The haunting silence is only the echo of what was never said. And as you stand there, breathing in that stale air of memory, something shifts. The past doesn't disappear. It integrates. Because wholeness isn't achieved by cutting away the pieces that hurt. It's achieved by bringing them home. Think of a tapestry. From the front, you see an intricate pattern, harmonious and beautiful. But flip it over, and you'll see knots, loose threads, places where the weaver made mistakes and tied them back together. We often want our lives to look like the front of the tapestry, neat, flawless, coherent. But it's the knots, the tangled threads on the other side, that give it strength. When you remember differently, you stop trying to edit the messy underside of your life. You begin to see that the beauty of your pattern depends on both the light and the shadow threads. So, how do we begin this remembering? It starts with permission. Permission to revisit without judgment. To ask not, "Why did this happen to me?" but, "What was I learning then?" even if I couldn't see it. When you ask why, you often stay trapped in pain. When you ask what, you invite transformation. Here's something I've seen time and again. People are terrified that if they stop holding on to their pain, they will lose the connection to what they loved. They think, if I stop grieving, it means it didn't matter. But grief is not proof of love. Integration is. When you can carry the memory softly, when it becomes a quiet companion instead of a constant wound, that's when you honor it most. Because you're no longer defined by it. You're shaped by it. Let's imagine for a moment that every memory is like a photograph. At first, the image is sharp, raw, saturated with color. You can't look at it without feeling the pang. But with time, the edges blur. The colors fade. Not because it's forgotten, but because the memory has been exposed to light, to exposure, to reflection. That fading is not loss, it's integration. It means the memory has become part of the mosaic of who you are. There's another kind of remembering I want to talk about, the kind that comes through the body, because our bodies remember what our minds try to forget. The quickening of the heart when we hear a certain song, the tightening in the chest when we pass a familiar street, the sudden softness that comes when someone looks at us the way they used to. Our bodies carry the stories our minds no longer have words for. And so, remembering differently also means allowing the body to release what it has held too long, to breathe where it has been constricted, to feel where it has gone numb. Sometimes it's not the memory itself that hurts, it's the resistance to feeling it. The clenching, the bracing, the refusal to let it move through. But when you allow the body to remember gently, without judgment, you make space for peace. Because to heal is to relax into what once broke you. Think of the way a river smooths a stone over time. The water doesn't erase the stone, it shapes it. The same current that once cut deep channels now caresses its surface. That is what memory does to us when we allow it to flow. It polishes us into tenderness. There's a quiet moment in healing where you realize that the past no longer has the same temperature. The memory that once burned now feels warm, familiar, almost kind. You can hold it without recoil. You can even smile at it, not because it wasn't painful, but because it taught you the depth of your own heart. And that's the shift. From "Why did this happen to me?" to "What did this awaken in me?" When you reach that place, you begin to live with remembrance, not resentment. I once spoke with a man who had lost the love of his life unexpectedly. For years, he carried her memory like a stone in his pocket, heavy, cold, constant. "I don't want to forget her," he said, "but I don't know how to keep living with this weight." And I told him, maybe the goal isn't to put down the stone. Maybe it's to let it polish into something smoother. Maybe the memory will never leave, but its edges will soften until it fits comfortably in your palm. You will carry it differently. That is what it means to remember differently, to let your memories evolve with you. Because the truth is, memory is not loyal to the past, it's loyal to the meaning you assign to it in the present. You are not the same person who experienced that pain. So why would you keep holding it the same way? Sometimes we cling to the past because we think that's where love still lives, but love isn't confined to memory. It can be reimagined. You can take the love that once connected you to someone and let it connect you to life again, to creativity, to empathy, to new relationships, to yourself. When you remember differently, you take love out of the museum of nostalgia and return it to the garden of the living. When you begin to remember differently, something profound happens. Your relationship with the past changes, and with it, your relationship to yourself. Because every story we carry about another person is also a story we carry about who we were with them. To remember differently means not only seeing them through new eyes, but seeing yourself through new eyes. Think about it. When you recall a love that ended, you don't just revisit the other person. You revisit the version of you that existed in their presence. The one who laughed freely, who trusted, who made promises, who didn't yet know the outcome. That self still lives inside your memory. And sometimes, what hurts the most is not losing them, but losing her, the version of you who believed in that story. So, remembering differently means inviting her back. It means saying, "You were not foolish for loving. You were courageous." It means rescuing your past self from the judgment of hindsight. Because when we look back, we often bring the knowledge of the ending into the beginning. We rewrite the story as if we should have known better. But love never lives in certainty. It lives in hope. And there is no shame in having hoped. You see, the past is not a fixed place. It's a conversation. Every time you revisit it, you bring your present self into dialogue with who you were. You bring wisdom to innocence, compassion to regret, forgiveness to pain. This is what it means to integrate. You no longer divide your life into before and after. You begin to see it as one continuous unfolding, each chapter informing the next. The love that broke you is also the love that awakened you. The loss that emptied you is also the loss that made space for what's next. Because every ending contains an invitation to see yourself more clearly, to love more wisely, to live more consciously. When people say, "I'll never be the same again," they often mean it as an expression of loss. But perhaps that's the point. We are not meant to be the same. Every love transforms us. Every heartbreak expands the map of our inner world. You don't move on by closing the door. You move on by walking through it and letting the light behind you illuminate what's ahead. Let's talk about love after loss. Not new love as replacement, but new love as evolution. When you remember differently, you don't erase what came before. You carry it with more grace. You bring the wisdom of your scars into your next connection. You love more slowly, perhaps, but more deeply. You listen more carefully, not just to others, but to yourself, because pain refines our attention. It teaches us what matters. I once spoke to a woman who said, "I'm afraid to love again. I gave so much of myself the first time. I don't know if I have anything left." And I told her, "You don't have less to give, you have more, because now your love carries the weight of experience. It's no longer naive, but intentional. It's no longer about fusion, but about choice." To remember differently is to understand that love doesn't always have to mean forever. Sometimes it means for a season, for a purpose, for growth. Not every person who walks into your life is meant to stay. Some come to awaken parts of you that were asleep. Some come to teach you how to let go. Some come to remind you of what you still long for. And when their role is complete, they leave, not as villains, but as catalysts. When you can remember a person that way, you release the need to rewrite the story as failure. It becomes a passage, not a wound. You see, we are meaning-making creatures. We can't control the events that happen to us, but we can choose the narrative that holds them. And the story you tell about your past determines the future you allow yourself to live. If your story is "I was betrayed," you live in protection. If your story is "I was abandoned," you live in fear. But if your story becomes "I was transformed," you live in possibility. This is not denial. It's authorship. It's choosing to give your pain purpose. And here's something deeply human. We don't only remember events, we remember emotions. The body stores the ache of what was unresolved. So part of remembering differently is allowing new emotions to meet the old memory. Empathy where there was once anger, gratitude where there was once loss. That emotional alchemy changes everything. Because when the heart softens, memory softens too. You might still think of that person sometimes, but instead of tightening, you breathe. Instead of wishing things were different, you whisper, "Thank you. Thank you for what we shared. Thank you for what I learned. Thank you for shaping the person I have become." That's when you know you've moved from remembering in pain to remembering in peace. And you may notice that in that peace, something else returns: tenderness, the capacity to feel beauty again, the willingness to be surprised by life, because memory, once integrated, doesn't keep you in the past, it reconnects you to the present. It's like the moment when winter begins to thaw. The ground is still cold, but you sense something alive beneath it. The memory of spring is returning. And this time, it's not about forgetting the winter. It's about understanding what it taught you about warmth. So yes, you will love again, but it won't be the same love. It will be a wiser love. A love that doesn't seek to fill what's missing, but to celebrate what's found. You will love not because you've forgotten the pain, but because you've transformed it into wisdom. And that is the quiet triumph of remembering differently. You stop living as a reaction to your past and start living as an expression of your growth. There comes a point in this journey, this dance between remembering and releasing, when you begin to understand that healing is not about turning the page, but about learning to read the same words with new eyes. You see, to live fully is not to erase your past, but to befriend it. The past is not a shadow you must outrun, it is the soil from which you grow, and growth is never tidy. It happens in spirals, in returns, in moments when you thought you were done. And then a scent, a song, a glance pulls you back into the ache. But this time, you feel the ache differently. It doesn't break you open the same way. It reminds you that you've survived. It reminds you that you can hold beauty and pain in the same breath. That's integration. Integration is when your past no longer competes with your present, when it no longer drags you backward or defines your future. It simply lives within you, as a layer, a note in the symphony of who you are. When you integrate your memories, you don't dissolve them. You dissolve the shame, the resistance, the self-blame attached to them. You look back and say, yes, that was me, that was us, that was then. And that simple acknowledgement, that was then, opens space for now. Because when you stop fighting your past, you make peace with your becoming. Think of your life as a river. There are bends and turns you could never predict, rocks that bruised you, moments when the current was too strong. But every drop of that river, every memory, every loss, every joy, is what carried you here. To deny the river is to deny your arrival. So when you remember differently, you are not rewriting the story. You are honoring its flow. Let me tell you something about integration. It is not loud. It's not a moment of triumph. It's quiet. It happens in small ways. When you realize you no longer check their social media, when the anniversary passes and you smile instead of ache, when a song you once avoided becomes a lullaby again. Healing whispers. It doesn't shout. And this quiet is powerful. Because it's in this quiet that you discover something miraculous, that you can hold gratitude and grief together, that the memory of what hurt can coexist with the joy of being alive. You no longer ask, why did this happen? But, what has this given me? This shift in question changes everything, because when you see your experiences as gifts, even the painful ones, you stop being a victim of your story. You become its narrator, its artist, its witness, and witnessing is sacred work. When you witness your past, you don't justify it. You give it form. You name it. You bring it into light. And what's brought into light no longer has the same power to control you. You may even begin to feel compassion for the people who hurt you, not because you excuse them, but because you understand them. You see their own limitations, their fears, their inherited wounds. You recognize that their choices were often born of their own unhealed pain. Forgiveness, then, is not a gift you give to them. It's the freedom you give yourself. To forgive is not to say, it's okay. It's to say, it no longer owns me. Forgiveness, in truth, is another form of remembering differently. And that is what liberation looks like, not the absence of memory, but the presence of peace. When you reach that place, something else begins to happen. Your relationship to intimacy deepens. Because when you have made peace with your own story, you no longer seek others to rewrite it for you. You no longer demand that someone fill the spaces your past left open. You meet people not from longing, but from fullness. And that kind of love, the love that comes after remembering differently, is the most honest kind. It's love that doesn't idealize or rescue. It's love that witnesses. Because now you know, to love is not to forget what was, but to hold space for what is. You can be with someone new and still carry your past loves with grace, not as ghosts, but as ancestors of your heart. Each one taught you something about connection, about vulnerability, about where you end and another begins. We often think healing is the opposite of remembering. But what if it's remembering well, remembering with tenderness, with curiosity, with understanding that every person you've ever loved helped you speak a new dialect of your own heart? This is the art of integration, to see your memories not as baggage, but as compost, the rich, messy material from which new life grows. And so, perhaps moving on is not a journey away from the past, but a deeper journey into yourself, into the parts that loved and lost and still dare to love again. Because love, even in its absence, leaves you more alive. When we say goodbye to someone, we never really lose them. We carry them in the way we now see the world, in the lessons that stay, in the softness that remains. And maybe that's the ultimate remembering, not through thought, but through being. When you walk differently, when you listen more gently, when you speak with more care, that is your memory living in action. The past becomes part of your kindness. And so, you don't move on by forgetting. You move on by remembering with a full heart, by allowing what was once heavy to become light, by realizing that every ending you've survived was never meant to close you. It was meant to open you. Because the purpose of remembering differently is not to change the past. It's to transform the present. And when you do that, something extraordinary happens. Life begins to trust you again. You find beauty where you once found pain. You find connection where you once found fear. You find yourself, not the one you were before, but the one you've become because of it all. So tonight, when the memories visit, don't push them away. Sit with them. Ask them what they still want to teach you. Hold them gently, the way you would hold an old photograph, aware that what you're touching is both fragile and precious. And then whisper, I remember you, but I remember you differently now. That's how healing begins. That's how we move forward, not by forgetting, but by remembering, with love.